Hello, Art 109. This week's artist is Judith Baca. She was born in LA to Mexican-American parents. She attended California State University Northridge, where she studied modern abstract art. She taught high school, worked for the LA Parks and Rec Department, and founded the City of Los Angeles' first mural program called SPARK, Social and Public Art Resource Center. She's their current artistic director. Baca has also been a professor in Chicano Studies and World Art at UCLA. She creates art that is shaped by an interactive relationship of history, people, and place. Baca's public artworks, she is a muralist, focus on revealing and reconciling diverse people's struggles for their rights. Together with the people who live there, they co-create monumental public art places that become sites of public memory. Now let's explore her historical context. As a young child, Baca was raised in a female-dominated household that included her mother, Hortensia Baca, her grandmother, and 2 aunts. Baca's grandmother raised her, while her mother worked in a tire factory to support the family. When Baca was 6 years old, her mother married and the family moved from their Huntington Park neighborhood to Pacoima, California. The change was a dramatic one for Baca, whose grandmother and aunts remained behind in their south-central LA home. The new town was a completely different world for Baca. In school, the primary language was English, and Baca struggled with that. Because of the language problems, Baca's teacher permitted the young girl to sit at a corner desk and paint, while the other students continued with their studies. It was a struggle with language that led to Baca's practice in art. Baca's grandmother, a Mexican indigenous woman, is described by Baca as a profound character that really influenced her. Baca believes that if there was any claim to why she became an artist, it would be the influence of her grandmother. Judy Baca did this mural that was loosely based on her grandmother. In grad school, she studied modern abstract art, so that's mainly lines and shapes without much subject matter. Upon graduating, her grandmother asked her, "What are you trying to say? Who are you speaking to?" And that inspired Baca to be more community-oriented instead of being so focused on the art world. Murals are great for this because they are public and belong to the people. Her quote, "I was perfectly equipped to speak to nobody I knew," describes this disconnect between her studies and her community. We've seen this disconnect before with folks, for instance, Wendy Redstar, who describes going to school to become an artist and then perhaps their teachers or the art world itself not really understanding them because of where they're from, the context of who they are. In Mexico, there is a tradition of muralism. From 1910 to 1920, a civil war ravaged the nation as citizens revolted against dictator Porfirio Diaz. This demand for reform signaled a new age in Mexican society. Issues concerning the popular masses, universal public education and health care, expanded civil liberties were at the forefront of government policy. At the end of the revolution, the government commissioned artists to create art, murals, that could educate the masses about Mexican history. This movement was led by Siqueiros, Diego Rivera, and José Clemente Orozco, known as Los Tres Grandes, the 3 great muralists who were active between the 1920s and 50s. They cultivated a style that defined Mexican identity following the revolution. Also active was Aurora Reyes Flores, who is considered to be one of the first Mexican-born muralists during this time. Reyes Flores was also a writer, activist, and teacher. She created 7 large-scale murals that highlighted the lives of rural teachers, laborers, and women. Attack on Rural School Teachers is a public work that Aurora Reyes Flores did that shows the violence that some teachers were subject to because of the social work that they were doing in rural communities. If we start from the left, a man is ripping up a book and then dragging a woman, a teacher, by her hair. She's also being struck with the butt of a gun while the school children are in the corner, afraid. This piece is called The First Encounter and tells the story of the indigenous people of Mexico and how they were affected by the Spanish colonizers. Those characters are on the right side of the painting in their armor and collars with smirking facial expressions. The native peoples are bringing offerings, which include fruit, jewelry, and flowers. You see the man in black holding the Christian cross and depictions of indigenous culture and religion on the left. There is a winged figure with a spear overhead, pointing to the Spanish as if to say they are a threat, with a connection to the landscape throughout. You'll see very clearly coming up how Reyes influenced Baca. But first, let's talk a bit about Spark, where she is artistic director and founder. In a 2001 article entitled Birth of a Movement, Baca describes how the ideals of the Mexican social mural movement inspired Los Angeles muralists in the 1970s, and how her work painting murals with at-risk youth formed the basis of the first citywide mural program and eventually led to the creation of Spark. She begins the article by saying, "Perhaps it was the abundance of concrete, or the year-round painting season, or the city full of Mexican workers that made Los Angeles the place where murals began to become a predominant art form. Or perhaps it was because an entire population, the majority of the city, had been disappeared in textbooks and the media and cultural markers of place, and needed to find a way to reclaim a city of Mexican and indigenous roots." So she's saying perhaps that's why there is such a this mural movement, why murals are so prevalent as an art form in LA. Los Angeles murals spoke to the cultural demands of previously underrepresented peoples. This is Baca continuing. Some works became cultural affirmation images. Others addressed the hard task of articulating and advocating for resolution of issues affecting the places where our people lived and worked. This new social power was not limited to immigrant labor nor indigenous people, but spread to the multiplicity of Los Angeles populations. African American, Thai, Chinese, Jewish, and women's murals began to appear on the streets of Los Angeles. Before long, community murals began to attract media attention and documentation. Murals began to tackle larger issues of police brutality, border crossings, drug addiction, gang warfare, and other difficulties of a life of poverty and exclusion. Early in the movement, space was freely available and uncontested. If you had the paint and the time, the wall and the message were yours. In this environment, the movement flourished. Spark's biggest project is a work called the Great Wall of Los Angeles that started in the 80s and is still going on today. Over time, this project has included more than 35 other artists and 400 young mural makers. The wall functions as a long narrative of another history of California, one which includes ethnic peoples, women, and minorities who were so invisible in conventional textbook accounts. Each summer, before adding to the mural, Judy and her team would learn about a new decade in California history. She described this learning as a revelation that really connected the team. Some of them even learned about how their own families were connected to the history, and then they would go out and represent that history in their painting. It is a half-mile in length with an accompanying park and bike trail, so a community space. The Great Wall of Los Angeles is a tribute to the working people of California who have shaped its history. Baca says, "I designed this project as an artist concerned not only with the physical aesthetic of a place, but the social, environmental, and cultural issues affecting the site as well. I am not a social worker, though people mistakenly call me one, and I am not a teacher, although I have teaching skills. I draw on skills not normally used by artists. I've learned as much as I've taught from the youth. I've had the good fortune to know by working alongside of them. They've taught me, among other things, how to laugh at myself, how to put play into hard work, and how not to be afraid to believe in something. I am extremely grateful." In the 1990s, specifically 1993, college campuses across California, USC, UCLA, Berkeley, etc., became the setting for a student movement of Chicanismo. A lot of factors came into play, but the catalyst for this movement was the death of Cesar Chavez. Like their parents in the 60s and 70s, Latino students called themselves Chicanos. So you'll hear terms, identifying terms like Latino, Latina, Chicano, Chicana, and then the gender-neutral versions of these, Latinx and Chicanx. But these students, during this time, were protesting. They were confronting officials with demonstrations, sit-ins, hunger strikes, and sometimes vandalism to demand more respect for their culture and more faculty appointments for Latinos. So at ULA, they were threatening, because of budget cuts, to cut the Chicana Studies program. So students there, like the one pictured, conducted a hunger strike, which is exactly how Cesar Chavez protested. And they were successful. The program was saved and renamed the Cesar E. Chavez Department of Chicana Studies, which, by the way, remember, UCLA is where Judy Baca taught for years, specifically in this department. This movement also spread across the entire United States. A few years later, the University of Southern California put out a call to artists. They wanted a work of art that acknowledged the concern and comments of their Latinx and Chicanx student community. Judy Baca was the selected artist and painted La Memoria de Nuestra Tierra, which translates to the memory of our land. It depicts a river that changes to a freeway at the border between Mexico and the United States. The central image of the mural is a kiva, a ceremonial structure, and in the upper right corner is the earth goddess, painted in 3 poses: asleep, awakening, and militant. There are also cultural figures throughout. Included among them are several USC students who were involved in the creation of the mural, as well as the conquistador figure, Diego Rivera, and Frida Kahlo as well. Migration of the Golden People is the first significant public work created in LA about the migration of Central Americans into the United States. And Baca did this in 2001. This work was part of a 14-week-long workshop in collaboration with the Central American Resource Center, a group that empowers the youth by encouraging them to take responsibility for their community and their own individual development. Youth of the Pico Union neighborhood where this mural is set were also included. The resulting mural emphasizes the 1970s and 80s, the period when most of the Central American populations in Los Angeles were forced to flee their homelands. So that means they faced oppression in their homeland, and then they've come to LA. The focus of this work is the people of Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala, the 3 regions that suffered oppression and civil war during this period. The mural reflects the terror of military oppression, but also forcefully expresses a determination to resist, whether by taking up arms or by joining a silent protest march. Here's a picture of Judy Baca working with youth on this mural in the planning stages. You see the timeline of Central American homeland migration on the wall that they've worked on together. So they have to kind of do that first, and then they can begin to figure out how they want to visually represent this history. Another image of the mural after its completion. I believe there's a digital component to this mural as well. She began to go from painting just on the wall to also incorporating digital techniques, which is what you see here. A full-scale digital mural called Seeing Through Others' Eyes from 2010. It is located at the RFK Community School in the Paul Schrade Library in Los Angeles at the former Ambassador Hotel. So on June 5th, 1968, Robert F. Kennedy, that's the brother of President John F. Kennedy, was shot and assassinated in the food service pantry next to the ballroom of the Ambassador Hotel after having won the California primary. So this mural is in the same location where he was assassinated. And in the mural, a lotus blossom forms the composition, with each petal representing one of the issues facing society that Robert F. Kennedy deemed most important: environment, intolerance, poverty, education, health, and war. And these lotus petals, of course, surround our central figure of Robert F. Kennedy. This is a full-scale digital mural located at the Miguel Contreras Learning Complex in the downtown LA school. Both UCLA students and MCLC high school students were assigned to create a mural in a 20-week period that commemorates the legacy of labor leader Miguel Contreras while visually representing the issues affecting the students who come from neighborhoods with many conditions that impede high school graduation. MCLC has a 56% dropout rate, so more than half of the students drop out of the school. The mural represents the DREAM Act being passed, protest, immigration, laborers in the field, poverty, food scarcity, many layers of meaning, acknowledging some of the issues the students face and why that dropout rate is present. Collections is a digital interactive work carried out over the internet between Navajo, Ute, which is another indigenous group, Latinx, and Anglo high school students. Students contributed, and then Judy Baca collages these images together into one digital mural. Imagery derives from components of cultural heritage while scrutinizing conflict that often happens between the youth. Like, hey, we're all facing something, let's stick together instead of conflicting with one another. Land and memory is also addressed to remind the youth of their historical connectivity. You'll read more about this piece in an article, but I did want to read this Judy Baca quote for you that emphasizes the importance of connectivity between people and the land. It is so important for artists to visualize for people the connectedness between us. And maybe that's what all my work has been about, the connectedness between us as peoples at that place, and that memory resides in the land. All you have to do is learn to hear it, to put your ear to the ground, and it comes right up out of the ground. You'll also watch a video about the Judith F. Baca Arts Academy. In 2012, the Los Angeles Unified School District named a school after her called the Judith F. Baca Arts Academy, located in Watts, her birthplace. So she doesn't work there, they just honored her in that way. The school serves about 750 students from early transitional kindergarten to 6th grade. 90% of the population is Latino Hispanic, and about 10% of their students are African American. The school's vision is to embrace a holistic approach that focuses not only on academic needs, but also physical, social, and emotional needs. You see an image of a mural here that Baca was a part of. So when you think of Judith Baca, think about that tradition of muralism. Think about her work with the youth and some of the issues that she tried to address with her art. The history that's sort of been excluded from the textbooks of certain groups of people, as well as some of the struggles and issues that they face today. All while putting this in a public space for sort of that, public education and enjoyment, beautification, that kind of purpose. All right, that's it for this week.